Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa made an important speech at the Islamabad Security Dialogues this Thursday, and that made headlines in India. It made headlines in Pakistan, but also in India. Now, he said several interesting things, but if you listen to people who've been watching Pakistan for a long time, particularly those who've been in the security, intelligence, military, diplomatic establishment, their response is that of a yawn. Oh, what's new? And they will say that, look, what's he saying? He's saying that it's time for India and Pakistan to bury the hatchet, to bury the past, his word, bury the past, and move on. And then that will help you focus on your economies, benefit from cooperation, benefit from connectivity. India can get a route to Central Asia via Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. And skeptics say, but isn't that what every leader of Pakistan has said at some point, elected or unelected, including Generals Ziaul Haq and Pervez Musharraf? They all say this at some point, but then turn around and wait and then stab you in the back, and then you're back to normal fighting them. So why should we get excited this time? Now, this is a very good point. So let's look at a line of disclaimer that you will find in every mutual fund advertisement. It says, past is not a guide or guarantee for future performance. Now, in the case of Pakistan, if past is the only guide to future performance, I am reversing the mutual fund disclaimer. If past is the only guide to future performance, then why are we even debating and discussing? We should forget about Pakistan and we should do what needs to be done to fix the Pakistan problem in some other ways. There's no point getting into intellectual arguments over it. So if that is the case and we decide it's a hopeless case, Pakistan, their past performance is a guide to whatever will happen in the future. This is कुत्ते की पूंछ, कुत्ते की दुम, ये नलकी में से निकालोगे तो फिर से टेढ़ी हो जाएगी. It's like the proverbial tail of a dog. It cannot remain straight. If that is the case, then we think about what are the options. So what is the option? Can you bomb Pakistan into Stone Age? Remember, that is the line that top US official Richard Armitage, arrogant fellow, he used with the Pakistanis, in fact the Pakistani ISI chief, after 9/11, when he wanted Pakistan to give up the Al-Qaeda and terrorists and to join the war against terror with America. Now, even he, when he said so, these were brave words. He had the power to scare the Pakistanis, but he also knew that it wasn't going to be possible even for America to do that. In fact, Americans over the past 20 years have bombed many parts of Afghanistan into Stone Age, and yet they are the ones who've lost the war, and they are trying to find an honorable retreat out of Afghanistan. So it doesn't look like Vietnam, where they had to pick up their last people by helicopter from the rooftop of their embassy. So that is not an option. Also, today's power differentials are not so much. India can defend itself against Pakistan and China, but militarily, economically, diplomatically, politically, there simply doesn't exist the kind of asymmetry where India could forcibly or forcefully achieve any objectives vis-a-vis Pakistan or China. In fact, this question came up in my off-the-cuff conversation with former Army Chief General V.P. Malik. Remember, he was the Army Chief during the war in Kargil, a highly respected former general. I asked him if he thinks it's possible today for India to militarily achieve any of its territorial objectives in Pakistan or China, that is vis-a-vis Pakistan-occupied Kashmir or Aksai Chin. And he very honestly said no. In fact, he gave a one-word answer, no. And then when I asked, he elaborated and he said, look, even if you had the military superiority, then if you start a war, there will be so much international pressure that you will be very soon forced to cease fire. So, which I am putting it in a more colorful way, that before you can move in even a couple of miles or a few miles, there will be so much international pressure and there will be such disapproval in the world of 2021 for a war like that. Also, we live in a neighborhood where three armies are all very strong. When I say armies, I mean armies, navies, air force. All three countries have very strong nationalism, and all three countries have large stockpiles of nuclear weapons. So this is not an Armenia versus Azerbaijan kind of situation ever, and that situation will never arise. It will never be like Azerbaijan going into Armenia or Russia going into Ukraine and grabbing Crimea. That is not going to happen in our region. We are three very strong powers. So if this option is not available, what is possible? Do we just sit the way we are and wait for generations in future to sort this out? Or as Deng Xiaoping once famously said to Rajiv Gandhi on his first visit to China in 1988, he said that maybe this generation, our generation, does not have the wisdom to solve this problem, the border problem between India and China. So let's leave it to a wiser generation. And you see, there is no guarantee that generation to generation we are getting any wiser, because if that was the case, we would not have nearly come to war again in East Ladakh as it happened. So there is a downside to letting these things fester for a very long time. So the question arises, where do we go from here? Which is what we are debating in this national interest. Now, the first answer to that question is a question. When you ask me, where do we go from here? Let me ask you, how did we get here? Now, if you think that one morning suddenly Director General of Military Operation on both sides woke up in a good mood and said, let me call my buddy in Delhi, let me call my buddy in Rawalpindi, अरे बॉस बहुत ज़्यादा हो गया, इतने दिनों से हम गोलियां चला रहे हैं, aimlessly we are firing that artillery, mortar, killing each other, civilians, not letting each other soldiers sleep. We are putting snipers here and there, picking out the odd guy, moving here and there. It is not going anywhere. So let's find a solution to this. Now that this is not how things happen. Between India and Pakistan, if you believe that this is how it happened, the two armies got in touch with each other one day and said, let's stop fighting, then either you are drinking something very, very strong like Mao Tai and in large amounts. That means it must have been given to you free by the Chinese. Otherwise, you cannot be so delusional. So you have to presume that this was preceded by several weeks, if not months, of back channel negotiations, when both sides came to the conclusion that what is going on right now is unsustainable. It can go out of control. It is in the interest, each side thought it is in my interest to do something about this situation, to de-escalate, because it takes two to clap. Otherwise, it does not work. So both sides concluded. Now, both sides might have had different reasons, and those are the ones that we are thinking aloud about. Now, if you see General Bajwa's words. Now, a lot of warnings came. Warnings came from a lot of members of our old intelligence and military establishment saying, see, all the Pakistanis want is, all General Bajwa wants is that India should get over the past, India should bury the past, while they will keep on subverting and destabilizing India. It's a good point. You should be suspicious, but you should not dismiss any change or any sign of a change out of hand. Because remember, during the talks between US and Soviet Union towards the end of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan had spoken a famous line with Mikhail Gorbachev. He said, trust but verify. In case of Pakistan, once again, all these wisdoms we turn inside out or upside down, as we had done with that mutual funds disclaimer. So in this case, you say, in case of Pakistan, as India looks at Pakistan, distrust but verify. Reagan said trust but verify. We are saying to Pakistan, distrust but verify. So we distrust what the Pakistanis are saying, what Bajwa is saying, but verify, which means give it a chance. If you distrust it and dismiss it out of hand, that simply doesn't work. Now, what are the two things he has said? If you look at his 13-minute speech, two things stand out. One, he said that there will be no interference from Pakistan. Pakistan will follow a policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of its neighbors and other countries in the region. That's India, Iran, Afghanistan, Obviously, it can't be interfering in China, although that's a delicious prospect if Pakistan interferes, say in Xinjiang area, which is bordering Pakistan. It will be helping a lot many more Muslims who need help than it might ever be able to do in Kashmir. Nevertheless, that was a facetious comment. But the fact is that he has said no interference in internal affairs. Now, you can always say, I can argue it from the other side, that look, you better be skeptical, because tomorrow he will play mischief in Kashmir and you will say, General Saab, you said I will not interfere in the internal affairs of another country, and he'll just turn around and say, but we never recognized Kashmir as a part of your country, so how is this your internal affair? So is it possible? It is possible. Will it happen? Let us see. Nobody is letting his guard down so much that we are that he will invite the commander of Pakistan's northern areas to play a game of golf at Badami Bagh cantonment in Srinagar. You will view it with a high degree of suspicion, and you will see once again, going back to the Chinese wisdom, you will cross the river by feeling the pebbles under your feet. But you will not be stationary. A cue has come to start moving, and that is the important part right now. The second thing that he says, again important, it's not as if he has made no mention of Kashmir. Nobody in Pakistan at that level can deliver a speech like this, that too at a big security dialogue, and not make a mention of Kashmir. But his mention of Kashmir is very interesting, nuanced, and in fact qualified. Normally, a Pakistani leader of any kind, particularly the army chief, would have said Kashmir, right of self-determination for the Kashmiris is non-negotiable, and at this point, first thing would have been India should restore the status quo ante behind August 5, 2019. No such thing has been said by him. In fact, I've interviewed many Pakistani leaders over time, and they all have one line which is rehearsed and remembered and memorized by rote by them. And in some cases, when they don't remember it, they remember it, or they don't want to take chances, they turn to an aide and say, "Bhai, aap bol dijiye wo Kashmir ke bare mein hamari line kya hai?" But in this case, he has not repeated that line. All he has said is very important. He said this normalization is a good idea, but this obviously would require India creating conducive environment in its part of Kashmir, in its side of Kashmir. Now, conducive environment can mean anything. It is not talking plebiscite, it's not talking self-determination, it is not talking adherence to the UN Security Council resolutions of whenever that the Pakistanis talk about by rote. So that also is a difference, and that is worth taking note of. Now, has Pakistani army given up its insistence on the restoration of status quo ante behind 5th August 2019, which means have they then accepted India's withdrawal of Kashmir's special status, which would then lead to other presumptions on what they want to do with line of control and the two sides of Kashmir? But let's not go there. It might be too early to make that conclusion. But think of the situation as it seems from where General Bajwa sits. We in India very often fret over the fact that we are caught in this two-front situation. We are triangulated between China on one side, Pakistan on the other, both nuclear weapon states. So what do? But look at the picture from where General Bajwa sits in Pindi. He sits in Pindi, and I'm deliberately using Rawalpindi, not Islamabad. That's loaded because that's the Pakistani Army's general headquarters, and that is where the power resides in Pakistan, not in Islamabad, not in the Prime Minister's office in Islamabad. Anyway, so when he looks at the world from Pakistan, he needs an increasingly domineering India to his east, increasingly domineering India, where the differential between the economies, militaries, global stature, stability is now increasing exponentially. That is a big worry for him. But when he looks west, he finds an unstable Afghanistan, which is not promising to become more stable. And he doesn't know what the new regime in Afghanistan will be, how stable it will be, who will be in control there, what will the warlords do. Afghanistan has still not accepted the border with Pakistan, Durand Line, as the border with Pakistan, and his own frontier region right now is going through a great deal of instability, particularly with Pakhtuns and Baluchis all being so angry. His economy is in a mess. To the north, he has China, which is becoming more and more overbearing with all its neighbors. Now, it's one thing to say, but China is our friend. But China is a rent-seeking friend, as the Sri Lankans know with Hambantota. Many African countries are realizing the Chinese lend you money like Shylock. Chinese don't gift you money. So that is not an easy friendship. Now, Iran, on the other hand, also is suspicious of Pakistan, and Iran is also a complex state. And you don't know what Iran's relationship going ahead will be with the Gulf countries, will be with America, will be with Israel. It's all very complicated, and there are many uncertainties there. The important thing with any strategic analysis is that not to just understand your own mind or speak your own mind, but also try and understand your adversary's mind. So if you take a step or if you take an initiative, you have to put yourself in the adversary's boots to think, how will he respond to this? Similarly, if the adversary takes an initiative, you have to see where he's coming from. In this case, we told you the problems that General Bajwa has as he looks around, looks across his borders, and looks at the state of his nation. Inflation is going up. The country is now importing wheat after having been self-sufficient for a long time. Inflation is crippling in Pakistan. It's on its 13th IMF loan, and the Gulf countries are giving it trouble. So he needs peace. Second, if he did not have his hatred for India, he has in his country and his army, his institution, if they did not have such a terminal hatred for India, would they then have such a compulsion to be a vassal state of the Chinese? No, and they have very little in common with the Chinese. Then they can have a more normal relationship with China. So what is the way ahead for him? Because the Americans, the Western world, does not have the same stakes in Pakistan and the AfPak region that they had in the past. They are now cutting their losses and going away. And tomorrow, if Pakistan, God forbid, try to use the same card again by letting Al-Qaeda or some such group, ISIS, to come up in that area, they know that consequences will be dire. So if you are General Bajwa, you would think probably that the only way out is peace with India. That, of course, you can't jump to that conclusion. You have to check it out, because if you make that conclusion, you have to make a presumption. And that presumption is a double one. One side of which is that General Bajwa is a reasonable man. And second side of which is that General Bajwa, a reasonable man, also has control over his army and his establishment within the establishment, and so on and so forth, because a large part of Pakistani army, particularly at middle levels now, is very ideological and very radical. So that is where he is. But there is good reason to believe that he sees the need for peace with India. Once again, be careful, distrust, but verify. Now, where is India coming from? One thing I'd say about Modi government is that they don't give their mind away. Particularly, they don't even give their mind away on who will be the Chief Minister of State, ABC. How would they give their mind away on their strategic thinking? So anybody who says in this city that I have an idea or I have an insight into what Modi government is thinking on strategic issues, he is lying, or he is drinking the same stuff at the bar table next to the other two guys who are drinking Mau Tai. So nobody knows. But we can go by the evidence that is available to us. So first of all, we have seen all the provocations. Pathankot, we have seen Pulwama, Balakot, Mendhar the next day, now Galwan. There were many occasions when Modi government would have been under pressure to go to war. Why it hasn't gone to war, I will say in conclusion, and maybe provoke, even trigger some of you by saying that. Now, look at some other evidence. The other evidence is Modi government's been in power now for 7 years. They've presented 8 budgets. When they came to power, they made big noise about Congress party having starved the armed forces. What have they done for the armed forces by way of budgets? In these 8 years, if you correct for inflation and rising salaries and DA and pension, the defense budget actually effectively either has remained the same or has gone down marginally. So this is not a government. 8 budgets is good enough evidence. This is not a government that is preparing for war. It is not also a government that looks forward to war. That is the reason you've seen that it has held its nerve after all these provocations. In fact, every time when things have seemingly gone out of control, this government, Modi government, has actually gone out of its way to calm things down. So I will conclude this with a thought which I had warned you will provoke you or trigger you, because that is the expression that millennials prefer to use these days. And that thought is that Modi government can build on a no war policy, or it can sustain a no war policy because it is strong enough to do so. Now, what am I saying? You would expect strong governments to go to war, but strong governments don't go to war. Strong governments can hold their nerve. So, when this provocation in eastern Ladakh took place, a lot of people, mostly Modi government's critics, were saying, oh, you are such a cowardly government. Nehru, whatever you might say of Nehru, at least he went to war. He knew he was going to lose and he lost, but he went down fighting, he went to war. Now, Nehru went to war in 1962 because his government and his own position in 1962 was that of a weak prime minister and weak government. Compared to that, Modi today in 2021 is a much stronger prime minister and this is a much stronger government. Nehru knew that he was going into a war he was unlikely to win, but his hand was forced. He had no choice. That happened because he was a weak government. His was a weak government. Modi has no compulsion to go down fighting or get caught into a war that he can avoid. In fact, that's why we should also find it more reasonable to believe that Modi is not preparing for war. He would prefer to have peace, of course, on his own terms.